Next week, we'll be discussing Orochi from 1925. Chris, how was your watch?
This was very much the first watch for this movie for me. I'm not well versed in silent films and definitely not well versed in Japanese silent samurai films. I enjoyed parts of it. I thought it was a hard watch, even though it was only like an hour and 10 minutes. It felt like a little bit longer. Uh, there are a couple really, really poignant parts. I really liked how they opened and closed the movie. We'll talk about that next week probably. But overall, I I'm glad I watched it, but I will probably never watch it again, if I'm being 100% honest. What about you, Andy? How was your first impression?
I would say it's pretty similar. Not familiar with the general terrain. And yeah, I'm curious how like the themes in the movie match up with other themes, Japanese cinema, silent cinema around the time, but I did a lot of eye rolling at at many parts. And KJ, what do you think?
Yeah, so audience, Tom's doing the questions, but I actually kind of recommended this film. And Chris, I didn't even think of that. If this is one of your first silent films, yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms to open. Tom, Andy, and I have seen at least a few silent films. I know Andy was on our The Man Who Laughs episode.
Yeah,
So, but so I,
way
you know, I
different than this.
very, yes, very different, and that's kind of why I'm bringing it here, audience. Audience, if you haven't seen Orochi, one of the things that makes it different from other silent films is it's narrated. So in Japan, the silent films were generally or could be narrated, as opposed to in the states they just had an orchestra playing and you relied on the intertitle cards. But how I found the film was I was doing searches for essential Japanese movies and came across like Tokyo Story, Osaka Elegy, Meishi, really great films. And then one of the films was I Was Born But, which was a silent film, which was also really good. I enjoyed it. And then on that list was Orochi. And I'd watched it, I guess, almost a year ago now, and I thought, man, this is so different because of that narration. So I really wanted to bring it to Talking Pictures trivia. But on this watch, it is pretty disconnected. It's as Chris said, it's a short movie, but it's not an easy movie to sit through. So audience, take your time, maybe do it in a few different stages. Um, yeah, how about you, Tom?
I did enjoy very much the Benchi kind of voice narration. And I think that's the reason to see it is the kind of voiceover narration. It's very impressive. She differentiates the characters in interesting ways. She has incredible vocal range. And while the film is interesting for, I think like a lot of the fight choreography is actually pretty interesting. It seems to be a time in Japanese cinema where that style of fighting is really new. It's being introduced. Unfortunately, because of the speed of the film, the grace of the fighting is kind of lost. It looks a little choppy until the last scene where we have this great crane shot that looks down on the fight and you get to see a little more of the choreography of it. But I think the reason to see this film is, as KJ mentioned, that voice over narrator, which if you look at the history of Japanese silent films, which was is more actually more extensive than silent films anywhere else in the world. It continued into the 1930s. It seems to have been because of this tradition of voiceover narration. And so it's a really great insight into this kind of interesting cultural product.
Audience, you can find Orochi on YouTube if you do a quick search.